Hey everyone, this is Corey with Casual EDC, and this is going to be a little voiceover modding video here. So, what we're looking at is a CRKT sketch. This is just the regular version with the steel frame lock and steel show side scale. We're going to be doing a bunch of different modifications to this. Just starting off by taking it apart. We're going to want everything separate here. Screws, pivot collar. We're going to leave the pocket clip on, but we're going to get the backspacer off and all that good stuff. So just taking out the body screws here, and we're going to separate the blade, the washers, and the two scales, the frame side and the show side. As you can see, we're just popping it off. And we got nylon washers or Teflon washers, which is no surprise coming from CRKT. And getting those out of the way there, we're going to be looking at these parts, and you can see as I'm holding out the lock side here, what I want to do is get a little bit more lock bar access and get rid of that that little bump there that I just pointed at. I'm also going to scallop out an area to get some better access to the thumb hole, and taking some material off of both sides will really help get some access to Spidey flick it as well as thumb flick it a little better. Moving on here, you see I have some nail polish, and what we're going to do with that is we are going to use the nail polish to mask off the areas where the washers are making contact with the blade, as well as the detent ball and the detent ball track. You can see here I'm painting the lock interface as well. We don't want to tear away any material with the acid we're going to be using for an acid wash, so we want to protect that area as well. It's important whenever you're doing an acid wash on a knife to understand that the acid is going to be eating away at the steel, and it's called an etch because it's literally going to be removing material. So the nail polish is what stops the excess removal. So it's really nice to be able to paint this on, and it's pretty easy to paint on exactly where you need it. But as you can see, I had a little bit of overflow. I use that overflow now on the detent ball track, and I'm going to go back in a few seconds here and clean that up with a sewing needle. You can see that splash over there. Just a little bit of impatience on my part. I'm trying to move a little too fast with the nail polish still being wet. As I mentioned, it's important to make sure any areas that are in contact with other steel are masked off. So anywhere that your washers are going to be making contact, the lock bar is making contact, and the detent ball. And it's also important that the hole where the pivot goes is covered as well, so you can see it's completely filled in right now with the nail polish. And that's because you don't, like as I mentioned, you don't want to eat away at somewhere that is important to the pivot or where the washers are, because then you're going to develop play or you're going to develop other issues. So this just keeps the steel the way it was manufactured, which is the way it works the best. I don't think you can do better than what the company did. You know, there's only very minor improvements you can ever make besides materials to knives like these. So it's important not to do too much and really just focus on doing what you can. And I'm holding the blade here with a microfiber cloth. Really wouldn't matter what I was holding it with as long as it's not my fingers. And the reason I say that is because this blade had been cleaned completely with 91% isopropyl alcohol, which is important when you're doing your acid etch because any finger oils will leave marks on the etch. And we want a nice matte gray etch is what we're going to do for this one here. So we want to make sure that there is no oils from our fingers on here, and your skin, no matter how well you wash your hands, are going to have oils on them. So either wear gloves while doing this, which is probably what I should have done, or you can do what I'm doing and hold it with the rag, and if you do touch it anywhere, just make sure you clean that off. Later on, we will do the same procedure that we do to the blade with the scales as well, the frame and the show side scale. Also masking off the areas where the detent ball is, the lock interface is, and the where the washers make contact, Finally getting around here to scraping off that excess using the sewing needle, and this works pretty well. It dries fairly quickly and scrapes up nice. I will go back and clean this up with a little bit of alcohol. It's important to get off what you can especially if it's somewhere that is very visible. This area doesn't matter all that much because it is going to be where inside of the scales where the pivot is, so you won't really see it, but wanted to clean it up, make the lines a little more cleaner, and make sure the etch is only where I want it to be. So just making sure that whole area where the washers are is nice and masked off. Sorry, I'm watching the video scroll by on the bottom, seeing how close we are to the next clip, because I don't know how much more I can ramble on about doing the same thing over and over. But as I mentioned, it is very important to have yourself a nice clean area. Now using the blade on a Leatherman to scrape. And this, looking back at it now, doing this voiceover well after the fact, I don't know if I would take the time to do this again, just because it's not in a visible part of the blade. If you ever wanted to etch a design onto a blade or some kind of pattern, you could always put nail polish on the blade. You could do a splatter pattern or something like that, just by literally flicking the nail polish onto the blade. You have a lot of really neat options. It's important to know that that's how the masking works. Finally, we've moved on to the next step, which is I just threaded a piece of titanium wire through the hole there, and now we're going to move on to our acid. So this is using ferric chloride mixed with some water. I started off with a really light mixture, about 1 part ferric chloride to 2 parts water, and I found that the etch was taking an extremely long amount of time. So you're going to see I have the wire that was dangling wrapped around a mechanical pencil, and that's just what I'm using to hold it into the acid and keep it there for an extended period of time. And you let it sit for however long you need. And because this is 8CR14 MOV, which is technically a stainless steel, it's going to take quite a long time for the acid to have any effect. If you're working with something like a D2 or any other type of tool steel with high carbon content, it's going to etch very quickly, 10 minutes or less. Overall, I want to say this process for me took about 25 minutes or so, and that was after I increased the acid concentration. I dumped maybe half of the solution out and then refilled the jar here with acid to the top. So you're looking more probably like a 50-50 mix of acid water to even like a 60-40, 70-30 in favor of acid. This is just the ferric chloride I was able to find on eBay a while ago, and I've done some projects with it, and this acid can be stored nice and easily in a plastic container. So once the 25 minutes or so had elapsed and I liked the color, I pulled it out and just gave it a quick dip in some water. You can also mix baking soda into the water here. It will help neutralize the acid and do a neutralization reaction, but not completely necessary because the ferric chloride mixture isn't too strong, and we're going to be wiping this off and cleaning it anyway after we dip it in the water here. So the water just washes off excess acid, and we can pull it out here, and I will show you guys the finish we got. So bang it off, and you'll see we have a nice matte gray, which I really like as an acid wash. I was going for something deeper. I was going to try and match the handle scales originally, but they ended up being a little different. All cleaned up, this is what we're looking like with that matte gray finish I was talking about. You can still see the CRKT and the sketch on the backside, but it's definitely much more faded now and a very plain blade. I did some stone washing by hand. This is just a jar with some stones, a drop of dish soap, and like half a teaspoon of water. I just shook this pretty lightly in a circular motion for about 10 minutes or so. I wrapped it up in a pillow because it's really loud, but this is the blade finish we got, and see it all cleaned up here, which I think it came out really nice. I left the masking on from the nail polish the whole time. I didn't want anything getting caught in those areas, so I figured it would give a little bit of protection, and I think this came out pretty nice. I really like the way it came out overall, so... Moving on here, this clip is really sped up because I didn't film everything, and I really wanted to just do a little demo that this is just a 4x36 bench sander, I guess is what you would call it. It's a belt sander, and there's also a disc sander attached to the side where the foam was actually mounted here. But I just used the radius on the end of the bench sander to get my radius on the handles here. I really messed this up a couple times, but I knew it was no big deal. And you'll see in a couple seconds when we get to the next clip that I had a little bit of a problem that I caused, but nothing that is going to bother me too much. Definitely would be an issue if you were looking to sell a modded version of this knife. Definitely a mistake I wouldn't make again. But just showing that basic tools here are all you need. The belts were a large pack from Amazon for, I want to say, like $20 for 10 different belts. This is just a 100 grit belt, I want to say. It's either 80 or 100 grit. Not meant for doing metal at all, but it worked just fine on the soft steel. I don't believe the handles are hardened on the CRKT sketch, so it removed material pretty easily. And I removed it from both sides, making the radius the same, and allowing a little more access to the thumb, as I was mentioning. It was a little tough to get my thumb in before to flip the knife, and I could never really get my middle finger in. So once we ground it off, I gave the scales the same exact treatment as the blade, as mentioned before. A quick dip into the acid and a little stone wash as well, and all the shiny areas are where my masking was. You can see my mistake. I put a hole in it, so thumbs down from me. I ground too far in and hit the milled out section, so now let's get it back together. Here you can see everything all as one. It's a really nice color. The blade is just a little bit darker than the handles, but it's got a nice distressed look with the wash and stone wash on both sides. And here it is in natural light. You're going to see that I really scratched the blade up while sharpening this, because I reprofiled the edge to 17 degrees, which is way shallower than it needs to be, but it cuts really nice now. This was a fun little project, and it's really not too difficult. Knife's super smooth, and yeah, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed.